The morning air was crisp as Thomas Blackwood scrolled through the photos on his laptop. He had been up since dawn, sorting through the hundreds of images he'd taken at yesterday's Veterans Day parade. As a freelance photographer specializing in local events, he needed to select the best shots to send to the town paper before their noon deadline. The parade had been larger than usual this year, marking the 110th anniversary of America's entry into World War I. Veterans from recent conflicts marched alongside vintage military vehicles and high school bands. Thomas had captured it all with his camera, moving through the crowd for different angles, focusing on the emotional moments when elderly veterans saluted or when children waved their small American flags. He paused on one particular image, a wide shot of the crowd gathered near Main Street. Something about it caught his eye. He zoomed in, focusing on the faces in the background. There was nothing especially remarkable about any of them. Families watching the parade, veterans in uniform, local politicians waving to constituents. But as he panned across the image, Thomas stopped suddenly. His finger hovered over the touchpad, and he leaned closer to the screen. Among the crowd stood an old man in what looked like an authentic World War I uniform. Thomas thought at first it must be a reenactor. There had been several in the parade wearing period costumes. But unlike the others, this man wasn't marching or performing. He stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, watching. His uniform was not a reproduction, but showed genuine age. The wool faded in a way that couldn't be faked, and there was something else about the man's face. Thomas zoomed in further. Despite the slightly blurred quality of the enlarged image, he could make out the man's features clearly enough. A chill ran through him. The face looking back from the screen was hauntingly familiar. The same high cheekbones, deep-set eyes, and slightly crooked nose that Thomas saw whenever he looked at old family photos of his grandfather's father, William Blackwood, the great-grandfather Thomas had never met, the soldier who had vanished without a trace during the Battle of the Somme in 1916. Thomas sat back in his chair, his heart racing. It couldn't be. The resemblance had to be coincidental. Some elderly veteran who happened to look like the faded sepia photographs in his grandmother's album. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. The face stared back, unsmiling and solemn, exactly as it appeared in the century-old photograph that hung in his mother's hallway. He picked up his phone and called his mother. "Mom, sorry to call so early. I need to ask you something strange." Thomas hesitated, suddenly feeling foolish. "Do we still have those old photos of great-grandpa William? The ones from the war?" His mother sounded sleepy but not surprised by the question. "In the album on the bookshelf. Why the sudden interest in family history?" "I'll tell you later. Can I come by and look at them today?" 2 hours later, Thomas sat at his mother's kitchen table. The old leather-bound photo album opened before him. The pages were brittle with age, and the black and white photographs were secured with small corner mounts that had yellowed over time. "I haven't looked through these in years," his mother said, setting down 2 mugs of coffee. "Not since your grandmother passed." Thomas turned the pages carefully until he found what he was looking for. There, on a page dated 1916, was a formal portrait of William Blackwood in his uniform, taken just before he shipped out to France. Thomas pulled out his laptop and opened the parade photo, zooming in on the mysterious figure in the crowd. His mother peered over his shoulder. "What am I looking at?" "This man." Thomas pointed to the screen. "I took this picture yesterday at the parade." She looked back and forth between the modern digital image and the century-old photograph. The color drained from her face. "That's not possible," she whispered. "I know." His mother touched the screen gently as if reaching for the man in the image. "He looks exactly the same. Even the uniform. Great-grandpa William disappeared in 1916, right? They never found his body?" She nodded slowly. "He was reported missing in action during the Battle of the Somme. Your great-grandmother received a telegram saying he was presumed dead. She never remarried, always held out hope he might come back someday." She looked up at Thomas. "Where exactly did you take this picture?" "Corner of Main and Elm, in front of the old courthouse." She was quiet for a long moment. "That's where they held the send-off ceremony when the local boys left for the war in 1917. There's a plaque there with William's name on it, along with the others who never came home." Thomas felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. "I'm going back there today. I need to see if anyone else noticed him." "Thomas, wait." His mother caught his arm. "If this is somehow real, and I'm not saying it is, be careful. Your grandmother used to say there was something strange about the way William disappeared, something the army never fully explained. What do you mean? She shook her head. Just stories. But she said that William's last letter home mentioned something about a special mission, something separate from his regular unit. She always believed whatever happened to him wasn't an ordinary war casualty. Thomas left his mother's house with photocopies of several pictures of William Blackwood and a tight feeling in his chest. On the drive downtown, he tried to make sense of what he had seen. The rational explanation was that a reenactor with an uncanny resemblance to his great-grandfather had attended the parade, perhaps even a distant relative he didn't know about. But the uniform had looked so authentic, and the man's expression, that grave, thousand-yard stare, matched exactly the look in William's eyes in the formal portrait. The town center was quiet compared to the previous day's festivities. Thomas parked near the courthouse and walked to the spot where he'd taken the photograph. The memorial plaque his mother had mentioned was there, mounted on a stone pedestal, in honor of those who made the ultimate sacrifice, 1917-1918. William Blackwood's name was fifth on the list. Thomas approached an elderly man sitting on a bench nearby, a newspaper folded on his lap. "Excuse me, sir. I was wondering if you were at the parade yesterday." The man looked up with rheumy eyes. "Haven't missed one in 60 years, son." Thomas showed him the enlarged photo on his phone. "Did you happen to notice this man? The one in the World War I uniform?" The old man squinted at the screen, then handed the phone back. "No, can't say that I did, but there were plenty of folks in costume. The Historical Society always does a nice job with those uniforms." Thomas tried several more people with the same result. No one remembered seeing the man in the WWI uniform. He was about to give up when he noticed a woman sweeping the steps of the small museum across the street, the town's Historical Society building. The woman, who introduced herself as Dr. Margaret Wheeler, the museum's curator, listened to Thomas's story with professional interest. "We didn't have any World War I reenactors in authentic uniforms at the parade this year," she said after examining the photo. "We have 2 reproduction uniforms in our collection, but they were on display here during the parade." She looked more closely at the image. "This doesn't look like a reproduction at all. The cut and the fabric aging appear genuine." "So you think it could be real? A genuine uniform from 1916? Dr. Wheeler hesitated. "It certainly looks authentic, but that would make it over 100 years old and in remarkable condition." She glanced up at Thomas. "You said this man resembles your great-grandfather?" Thomas showed her the photocopies of William's pictures. She studied them with growing interest. "The resemblance is striking. Would you mind if I keep copies of these? We're preparing an exhibit on local soldiers who served in the Great War. William Blackwood's story, a soldier who went missing rather than confirmed killed, would make a compelling addition." Thomas agreed, and Dr. Wheeler invited him inside the museum to see their World War I collection. As they walked through the small exhibition hall, she explained that their town had sent over 200 men to fight in Europe, nearly 30 of whom never returned. "Many of the bodies couldn't be recovered or identified," she said. "The fighting on the Western Front was horrific in ways that are hard for us to comprehend today. Men disappeared into the mud or were completely obliterated by artillery. They stopped before a glass case containing various artifacts, dog tags, letters, a damaged helmet, and several medals." "Was your great-grandfather with the regular army units?" she asked. "I think so. Though my mother mentioned something about a special mission in his last letter home." Dr. Wheeler's expression changed subtly. "Do you still have that letter?" "I don't know. I can ask my mother. If you find it, I'd be very interested in seeing it. There were certain specialized units formed during the war that aren't well documented." She paused. Some of the experiments conducted by both sides weren't something they wanted in the official record. "Experiments? What kind of experiments?" Dr. Wheeler seemed to catch herself. "Military research mostly, new weapons, communication techniques, that sort of thing." She smiled professionally. "Let me give you my card. Please call me if you find that letter or any other documents related to your great-grandfather's service." As Thomas was leaving, Dr. Wheeler called after him. "Mr. Blackwood, one more thing. Where exactly did you take that photo yesterday?" Thomas pointed across the street. "Right there in front of the courthouse." "Interesting." She seemed to be considering something. "That's where they held the draft registration in 1917. All the local men who enlisted gathered there before shipping out. She gave him a searching look. "If you see that man again, I'd be very interested in speaking with him." That evening, Thomas couldn't get the mysterious figure out of his mind. He went through the rest of his parade photos carefully, looking for additional shots that might have captured the man in the WWI uniform. In one wide-angle picture taken about 20 minutes after the first, he found him again, standing in almost exactly the same spot, but now looking directly at the camera. Thomas felt a chill run through him. The man's gaze seemed to pierce through the photograph, as if he had been aware of Thomas taking his picture. Thomas called his mother. "Did you find anything else about Great-Grandpa William? Any letters or documents?" "I've been looking through Grandma's old cedar chest," she said. "There's a bundle of letters from William to his wife, your great-grandmother Elizabeth, and I found something else you might want to see." Thomas drove back to his mother's house that same night. The bundle of letters she had found was tied with a faded blue ribbon, the paper yellowed and delicate with age. Most were fairly standard war correspondence, a young soldier telling his wife he was safe, asking about life back home, expressing hope that the war would end soon. The last letter, dated July 1st, 1916, the day before William was reported missing, was different. "My dearest Elizabeth," it began, "tomorrow I leave for a special assignment. I cannot tell you the nature of our mission, as we have been sworn to secrecy, but I have been told it may help bring this terrible war to a quicker end. Captain Reed has selected only 5 men from our company. It is an honor to be chosen, though I admit I am apprehensive. The captain has been working with a scientist who has developed something he says will change the nature of warfare forever. I do not understand it fully, but it involves some kind of new technology. The other men joke that we are to be guinea pigs, but I believe in what we are doing. If all goes well, I will return to you by month's end. Keep me in your prayers, my love." The letter was signed simply, "Forever yours, William." "This must be the special mission Grandma mentioned," his mother said. She never knew what it was about, only that William never came back from it. "Did the Army ever provide any details about what happened to him?" She shook her head. "Just that he was missing, presumed killed. His commanding officer sent a personal letter expressing condolences but gave no specifics. Grandma said the other 4 men who went on that mission also disappeared. Their families were told the same thing. And what's this other thing you found?" His mother handed him a small tarnished metal object. It was a pocket watch, its case dented on one side. This was William's. The Army returned his personal effects, but this wasn't among them. It arrived in a separate package 3 months after he disappeared, with no explanation. Just a plain box with the watch inside, addressed to Elizabeth. Thomas turned the watch over in his hand. The initials WB were engraved on the back, along with a date, June 12, 1912, presumably when it was given to him. He pressed the release and the case popped open to reveal the watch face. The glass was cracked and the hands were frozen at 3:47. "The strange thing," his mother continued, "is that Elizabeth always insisted the watch was with William when he left for the war. She remembered him checking it the morning he shipped out. So how did it find its way back to her after he disappeared?" Thomas studied the watch more closely. Something about it seemed odd. The metal felt unusually heavy, and there was a faint inscription around the rim of the face that he couldn't quite make out in the dim light. "Can I borrow this? And the letters?" His mother nodded. "They're your heritage as much as mine. Just be careful with them." Back at his apartment, Thomas examined the watch under his desk lamp. The inscription around the rim was in tiny, precise lettering, but it wasn't in English. After trying several online translation tools, he identified it as Latin. "Tempus neminem manet, sed aliquando revertitur." Time waits for no man, but sometimes it returns. He set the watch down, his mind racing. A soldier who disappeared on a secret mission in 1916. A mysterious figure at a parade who looked exactly like him, over 100 years later. A watch that somehow found its way home after its owner vanished. Thomas turned to his laptop and began researching. He started with what Dr. Wheeler had mentioned about experimental military units in World War I. Most of the information he found related to chemical warfare, early tanks, and aircraft development. But buried in an article about lesser-known military research was a brief mention of something called the Kronos Project, a theoretical experiment involving temporal displacement. that had been funded briefly by the British government in 1916 before being shut down as impractical and potentially dangerous. The article provided few details but mentioned that an American scientist named Dr. Elias Reed had been involved. The name struck Thomas immediately. Captain Reed, the officer mentioned in William's last letter. Further searching revealed that Dr. Elias Reed had been a physicist who had worked at Princeton before the war. He had published several controversial papers on what he called temporal mechanics before joining the war effort as a scientific advisor. After 1916, there was no further record of his academic work. According to a brief obituary, he had died in 1921 under unclear circumstances at the age of 45. Thomas stayed up past midnight, following this thread through obscure academic journals and declassified military records. The more he read, the more convinced he became that his great-grandfather had been involved in something far stranger than conventional warfare. He was about to shut down his computer when he received an email notification. It was from Dr. Wheeler at the Historical Society. "Mr. Blackwood, after our conversation, I did some research on your great-grandfather. I found something in our archives that might interest you. It's a newspaper clipping from 1921 that mentions William Blackwood. Would you be able to come to the museum tomorrow? I'll be there from 9 a.m. Regards, Dr. Margaret Wheeler." Thomas barely slept that night. He dreamed of muddy trenches and the sound of distant explosions. In the dream, he was walking through fog, following a figure in a faded uniform who always remained just ahead of him, out of reach. When the figure finally turned, Thomas saw his own face staring back at him. He woke with a start at dawn, the pocket watch clutched in his hand, though he didn't remember taking it from the nightstand. For a disorienting moment, he thought the hands had moved, but in the clear morning light, he could see they were still frozen at 3:47. The Historical Society wasn't open to the public on Mondays, but Dr. Wheeler met Thomas at the side entrance as arranged. She looked as if she hadn't slept much either, her eyes bright with contained excitement. "Thank you for coming," she said, leading him through the empty museum to her office in the back. "What I found may not amount to anything, but given what you showed me yesterday, I thought you should see it." She unlocked a drawer in her desk and removed a plastic sleeve containing a yellowed newspaper clipping. It was from the local paper, dated March 17, 1921. "Local man claims encounter with long-missing soldier," the headline read. The article was brief. "Mr. Henry Collins of Elm Street reports a strange encounter near the town hall yesterday evening. Collins claims to have spoken with a man who identified himself as William Blackwood, a soldier reported missing in action in France in 1916. According to Collins, the man appeared disoriented and asked what year it was. When told it was 1921, the man became agitated and fled. Collins, who knew Blackwood before the war, insists the man was identical to the missing soldier, though he was wearing what appeared to be a modern army uniform rather than the one he would have worn in the Great War. Police have found no trace of the individual in question and suggest Collins may have encountered a relative of the missing man." Thomas read the article twice, his pulse quickening. 5 years after he disappeared, and he was wearing a modern uniform. Dr. Wheeler nodded. For 1921, that would have meant a post-war uniform, different from what he wore in 1916. And now he's appeared again, but in his original uniform. Thomas looked up. "What do you make of this?" Dr. Wheeler hesitated before answering. "Professionally speaking, I should say this is just an interesting historical curiosity, perhaps a case of mistaken identity that happens to connect to your family history in a compelling way." She paused. "But off the record, I think something very unusual happened to your great-grandfather during that special mission he mentioned in his letter." She turned to her computer and pulled up a document. "After we spoke, I did some digging into military research programs during the First World War. Most of it is still classified, believe it or not, even after all this time. But I found references to something called Project Kronos in some recently declassified British intelligence files." "I saw that too," Thomas said. "Something about temporal displacement." "Yes, the official records are vague, but reading between the lines, it appears they were attempting something that sounds impossible. Some kind of time manipulation experiment." "Time travel?" Thomas couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice despite everything he had seen. "Not exactly, at least not as we think of it from science fiction. The theoretical papers I found suggest they were working on what they called temporal isolation, removing a subject from the normal flow of time for strategic purposes. What purposes? Imagine soldiers who could move between moments in a battle, appearing and disappearing at will. The perfect scouts or saboteurs. The enemy would never know when or where they might appear. Thomas thought about the implications. And my great-grandfather was one of the test subjects? It appears so. According to the fragmentary records I found, the experiment took place on July 2nd, 1916, the exact date William went missing. It involved 5 American volunteers and was conducted by a team led by Dr. Elias Reed. What happened? Dr. Wheeler's expression grew somber. The official record says only that there was a catastrophic equipment failure and that all subjects were lost. The project was immediately shut down. Lost, but not necessarily dead. Exactly. She leaned forward. I think your great-grandfather and the others became untethered from normal time. Based on the 1921 newspaper article and your photograph from yesterday, he appears to be drifting, for lack of a better word, appearing briefly in different periods before disappearing again. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. And he's confused. In 1921, he asked what year it was. He may not be experiencing time linearly. For him, those appearances might happen in a different order than we perceive them. Thomas took out the pocket watch and placed it on the desk between them. What about this? It was returned to my great-grandmother months after he disappeared, with no explanation. Doctor? Wheeler picked it up carefully, examining it with growing interest. May I? At Thomas's nod, she opened the case and studied the inscription. Time waits for no man, but sometimes it returns, she translated. This doesn't look like a standard inscription you'd find on a watch from that period. Could it have something to do with the experiment? Possibly. She turned the watch over in her hands. The weight is unusual too, almost as if she pressed gently around the edge of the watch face. To their surprise, the entire face lifted slightly, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Inside was a small folded piece of paper. With trembling fingers, Dr. Wheeler extracted the paper and unfolded it. It was a note written in faded ink. To whoever finds this, I am trapped between moments. The experiment failed, but not as they think. We are not dead, but displaced. I catch glimpses of different times as I pass through. 1921, 1944, 1968, 2003. I cannot control when or where I appear. The others are lost completely. I alone seem able to return repeatedly to Millfield, drawn back to the places I knew. If this reaches Elizabeth, I love you always. If this reaches my descendants, look for me on July 2nd, 2026. Dr. Reed calculated a convergence of factors that might allow a permanent return on that date. I will try for the courthouse square at 3:47 p.m. William Blackwood, Lieutenant, U.S. Army. Thomas read the note 3 times, his hands shaking. July 2nd, 2026. That's less than a year from now. The 110th anniversary of his disappearance, Dr. Wheeler noted. And 3:47, the time shown on the watch. He's been trying to come home for over a century. Thomas felt a lump in his throat, appearing briefly before being pulled away again. If his note is accurate, the Veterans Day parade you photographed him at was just one of many moments he's briefly materialized in our timeline. Thomas thought about the implications. He'd be seeing a world completely transformed, from trenches and horse-drawn transport to smartphones and drones. And yet he recognized the courthouse square. Some things remain constant. Dr. Wheeler carefully refolded the note. The question is, what do we do with this information? We wait for July 2nd next year, Thomas said without hesitation, and we try to help him come home. Over the following months, Thomas threw himself into researching both his great-grandfather's life and the mysterious Kronos project. He tracked down military records, scientific journals, and even the descendants of Dr. Elias Reed, though they knew little about their ancestors' wartime work. Dr. Wheeler became his partner in this quest, using her historical expertise and academic connections to access archives that would have been closed to Thomas alone. Together, they pieced together the story of what had happened on July 2nd in 1916. The experiment had taken place in a makeshift laboratory near the front lines. William and 4 other soldiers had volunteered, believing they were testing a new type of reconnaissance technology. Dr. Reed's device, powered by a combination of electrical generators and radioactive elements that were poorly understood at the time, was supposed to create a temporal bubble that would allow the soldiers to observe enemy positions while remaining invisible and untouchable. Instead, something went catastrophically wrong. According to the only surviving witness account, from a junior technician who had been outside the main laboratory when the accident occurred, there was a blinding flash of light, followed by complete silence. When he entered the room, the 5 soldiers and Dr. Reed had vanished, leaving behind only scorch marks on the floor and walls. The technician's report, classified until 2010, included one detail that caught Thomas's attention. Before disappearing, Blackwood was checking his pocket watch. As the light enveloped him, he appeared to press something on the watch, though I cannot be certain what I saw in the chaos of the moment. The watch must be connected to his ability to partially control his appearances, Dr. Wheeler theorized. Perhaps it somehow became linked to him during the experiment. As the months passed, Thomas became increasingly obsessed with the approaching date. He took a leave of absence from his job and moved back to his hometown to be closer to the courthouse square. He and Dr. Wheeler set up monitoring equipment around the area, hoping to detect any anomalies that might precede William's appearance. They also searched for signs that William had appeared in other years on the same date. In the town archives, they found a police report from July 2, 1976, describing a disoriented elderly man in an antique military uniform who had been briefly detained before leaving the station by unknown means. A local newspaper photo from July 2, 2003 showed a crowd gathered for an Independence Day weekend celebration, with a blurry figure in the background that bore a striking resemblance to William. As July 2, 2026 approached, Thomas experienced increasingly vivid dreams of his great-grandfather. In these dreams, William spoke to him across a vast distance, his voice fading in and out like a radio losing its signal. "The convergence is coming," he would say. "I can feel the pull stronger now. But something is fighting against it. Something wants to keep me in the in-between." Thomas would try to ask questions, but William would continue as if he couldn't hear him. "The others are lost, scattered across time, but I found an anchor." In the dreams, William would hold up the pocket watch. "Reed gave it to me just before the end. Said it might help if things went wrong." The dreams always ended the same way. William looking over his shoulder in fear at something Thomas couldn't see, then running into a thick fog that swallowed him completely. The night before July 2nd, Thomas had the most disturbing dream yet. He saw William standing in a gray, featureless void, surrounded by floating fragments of different time periods. A trench wall here, a modern building there, all disconnected and incomplete. "It's getting harder to hold on," William said, his voice strained. "The spaces between times are filling with something else, something that doesn't want me to leave." "What do you mean?" Thomas asked in the dream. William's eyes widened with fear. "They're the ones who didn't make it back. The ones who got lost completely. They've become something different." He looked around nervously. "I don't think they're human anymore, and they don't want any of us to go home." Thomas woke in a cold sweat. The dream had felt more real than any before it, not like a product of his subconscious, but like an actual communication across the barrier of time. July the 2nd dawned clear and hot. Thomas and Dr. Wheeler arrived at the courthouse square at dawn to set up their equipment. They had brought everything they could think of that might help: cameras with various filters, electromagnetic field detectors, thermographic sensors, and even a small portable generator in case they needed to provide power to stabilize whatever phenomenon might occur. The pocket watch, which Thomas had kept with him constantly for months, felt unusually warm in his pocket. When he checked it that morning, he could have sworn the second hand twitched slightly, though it immediately stopped again. As the day progressed, a small crowd gathered, mostly curious locals who had heard rumors about what Thomas and Dr. Wheeler were doing. Thomas had not been able to keep their research entirely secret in the small town, and stories had spread about the mysterious soldier who might appear that day. By 3:30 p.m., the square was filled with about 50 people, some skeptical, others hopefully curious. Thomas positioned himself exactly where he had photographed William during the parade, the pocket watch in his hand. At 3:40, their equipment began registering anomalies. The temperature in the center of the square dropped suddenly by 15 degrees. The electromagnetic sensors showed readings off the chart. Static filled their radio receivers. "It's starting, Doctor," Wheeler said, checking the monitors. The readings matched theoretical models for temporal disturbances. At 3:45, a light mist began to form in the square, despite the clear, hot day. It swirled in unnatural patterns, sometimes taking shapes that almost looked human before dissolving again. The pocket watch in Thomas's hand grew hot, almost too hot to hold. The hands, frozen for over a century, suddenly began to move, ticking backward rapidly before stopping again at 3:47. At exactly 3:47, the mist in the center of the square coalesced into a human figure. For a moment it was transparent, like a reflection in water. Then it solidified, and William Blackwood stood before them, exactly as he had appeared in Thomas's photograph. A young soldier in a WWI uniform, looking bewildered but determined. William's eyes scanned the crowd until they found Thomas. Recognition flickered in his gaze. "You're Elizabeth's grandson," he said, his voice sounding distant and hollow as if coming from far away. "I've seen you in the fragments. You have the watch." Thomas stepped forward, holding out the pocket watch. "Great-grandfather William, we got your message. We're here to help you come home." William reached for the watch, but his hand passed through it like smoke. "It's not strong enough," he said, looking around frantically. "The connection is weak. They're coming." "Who's coming, Doctor?" Wheeler asked, stepping forward with a device in her hand that was recording off-the-chart readings. "The lost ones. The ones who've been between for too long." William's form flickered, becoming momentarily transparent before solidifying again. "They don't want me to leave. If I go, they'll be alone in the void." As if in response to his words, the mist around the square thickened, forming shapes that moved with disturbing, jerky motions. Thomas could almost make out faces in the mist, distorted, agonized faces. "The other soldiers from the experiment?" Thomas asked. William nodded grimly. "What's left of them? They've forgotten they were human, forgotten everything except the in-between." He looked at the watch in Thomas's hand. "The watch is the key. Reed modified it before the experiment. It's connected to me, to my timeline. How do we use it to bring you back completely?" Thomas asked, desperately aware that they might have only moments before William disappeared again. Reed said, "Concentration of temporal energy. A focused point." William's form flickered again, more violently this time. The distorted shapes in the mist moved closer, reaching toward him with elongated limbs. "The courthouse clock. It needs to connect with something that measures time in this world." Thomas understood immediately. He ran toward the courthouse, pushing through the stunned onlookers. The historic clock tower had stood since 1890, its mechanism still original, though now electrically wound rather than by hand. He found the door to the tower unlocked. Dr. Wheeler had arranged access to all parts of the building for their experiment. Taking the stairs two at a time, he climbed to the clock mechanism room, just behind the 4 clock faces that adorned each side of the tower. The massive gears and wheels of the clock turned steadily, a testament to 19th century craftsmanship. Thomas approached the central axle, where the hands of all 4 clock faces connected. He held up the pocket watch, unsure exactly what to do but trusting his instinct. Below in the square, William was fading in and out of visibility. The misty shapes had completely surrounded him, their forms becoming more solid as his became less so. "Doctor." Wheeler's equipment was going haywire, some devices shorting out entirely from the energy surging through the area. In the clock tower, Thomas felt the pocket watch vibrate in his hand, resonating with the movement of the larger clock mechanism. Acting on impulse, he pressed the watch against the central axle where all the gears connected. The effect was immediate and dramatic. A pulse of energy shot through the clock tower, and the bells began to ring, though it wasn't the hour. Down in the square, William's form suddenly snapped into complete solidity. The misty shapes around him recoiled as if burned. Thomas raced back down the stairs and out to the square. William stood in the center, looking more substantial than before. The watch in Thomas's hand had changed. The case now gleamed like new, and all 3 hands moved smoothly around the face. "It's working," William said, his voice clearer now. "The connection between the watch and the tower clock is stabilizing me." He looked around at the retreating misty forms, but they won't give up easily. As if proving his point, the mist surged forward again, forming more distinct shapes, twisted parodies of human forms in tattered uniforms. They reached for William with elongated fingers, their faces contorted in silent screams. "They want to drag me back," William said grimly. "They've been alone for so long. They can't stand to lose one of their own." "What do we do?" Thomas asked, stepping protectively toward his great-grandfather. "Complete the circuit," William said. "The watch, the tower clock, and me, we're all connected across time, but the connection needs to be stronger." Dr. Mitchum Wheeler, who had been monitoring her equipment, called out, "The temporal energy is spiking. Whatever you're doing, it's creating a stable point in the time field." The misty figures had completely surrounded William now, their forms becoming more solid as they drew on the energy in the square. They reached for him with desperate, grasping motions. "Give me the watch," William said to Thomas. "I need to be holding it." Thomas hesitated only a moment before placing the watch in William's outstretched hand. This time, William was able to grasp it, though his fingers still looked slightly transparent. The moment the watch touched William's palm, the hands began to spin rapidly. The misty figures recoiled again, shrieking in silent fury. William stood straighter, his form becoming more defined, more present. "It's not enough," he said, looking at the watch. "The connection is still too weak." Thomas thought quickly. "The courthouse plaque. Your name is on it. It's another connection to this time and place." William nodded in understanding. Together, they moved toward the memorial plaque where William Blackwood's name was listed among the fallen. The misty figures followed, their movements becoming more frantic, more desperate. As they approached the plaque, William reached out his free hand and placed it over his own engraved name. The effect was immediate. A pulse of energy rippled through the square, and the courthouse clock began to chime, though it wasn't the hour. The pocket watch in William's other hand glowed with an inner light, its ticking suddenly audible to everyone in the square. The misty figures retreated, their forms becoming less distinct. William stood straighter, his body now completely solid, no longer flickering between states of existence. "It's working," Dr. Wheeler called, checking her instruments. "The temporal anomaly is stabilizing." But the victory was short-lived. The misty figures, now keeping their distance, began to swirl together, merging into a larger, more powerful entity. The temperature in the square dropped dramatically, and a high-pitched whine filled the air. "They're combining their strength," William said, his expression grim. "They've been trapped between times for so long they've forgotten what it means to be human, to be separate individuals. They've become something else entirely." The combined entity surged forward, a mass of swirling gray with dozens of faces visible within it, all contorted in rage and desperation. It reached for William with multiple elongated arms. "I can't let them take me back," William said, clutching the watch tightly. "Not when I'm so close to coming home." Thomas stood beside his great-grandfather, facing the approaching entity. "What can we do?" William looked at the watch, then at the courthouse clock tower. "Complete the circuit," he murmured. Then louder, "We need to close the loop. The watch connects me to this time, and the tower clock amplifies that connection. But there's still something missing." Dr. Wheeler approached, her scientific curiosity overcoming her fear. "What's missing?" "A personal connection. Something that binds me to this specific moment, to this version of time." William looked at Thomas. "Something that connects me to my family line, to the present." Thomas understood. "Blood. We share the same blood." William nodded. "In the stories my grandmother told, blood was always the strongest binding agent, the thing that could connect across time and space." Without hesitation, Thomas took out his pocket knife. He made a small cut on his palm, then held his bleeding hand out to William. "Take my hand." William reached out, his own hand still clutching the pocket watch. As their hands clasped, blood mingling with the metal of the watch, another surge of energy pulsed through the square. The courthouse clock chimed again, louder this time, and the hands on the pocket watch spun wildly before stopping at the current time. The swirling entity let out a silent howl of rage and rushed forward. But this time, instead of reaching for William, it seemed to hit an invisible barrier around him and Thomas. It pressed against this barrier, the faces within it contorting with effort, but could not break through. "It's working," William said, his voice now completely normal, no longer distant or hollow. The connection is complete. I'm anchored to this time now. The entity redoubled its efforts, the swirling mass growing darker and more violent. Cracks appeared in the invisible barrier, and William grimaced with the effort of maintaining his position. It's not enough, he gasped. They're too strong together, too desperate. Thomas felt the connection between them weakening. William's hand in his began to feel less substantial. What else can we do? William looked at the swirling entity, his expression shifting from fear to pity. They're lost, have been for over a century. They can't find their way home because they've forgotten who they were. He turned to Thomas. I need to remind them, show them what they've forgotten. Before Thomas could stop him, William released his hand and stepped toward the entity, holding the pocket watch out before him like a shield. James Harris, he called out. Matthew Collins, Peter Donovan, George Simmons, remember who you are. The entity paused in its assault, the swirling slowing slightly. We were soldiers together, William continued, his voice strong and clear. We volunteered for Reed's experiment together. You had lives, families, hopes for the future. Remember, he held the watch higher. James, you had a fiancé waiting for you in Boston. Matthew, your father's farm in Ohio needed you to come home. Peter, you wanted to be a teacher after the war. George, your son was born just before you shipped out. As William spoke, the entity began to change. The swirling mass separated, individual shapes pulling away from the whole. The faces within became more distinct, more human. You don't belong in the in-between, William said, his voice gentler now. None of us do. It's time to find your way home, or to whatever comes after. This limbo has held us too long. The shapes continued to separate, forming 4 distinct figures that still lacked complete definition, but were recognizably human in form. They hovered around William, no longer threatening but seemingly confused. I can't bring you to this time with me, William said to them. The connection isn't strong enough for all of us, but I can show you the way out of the in-between. He held up the watch, which now glowed even brighter. Follow the light. It leads to the proper flow of time. You can move forward now, as you were meant to. The 4 misty figures hesitated, then one by one they approached the glowing watch. As each one touched it, they seemed to become momentarily more solid, more defined. Young men in WWI uniforms, their faces briefly clear and human, before dissolving into particles of light that floated upward and disappeared. When the last one had gone, William lowered the watch and turned back to Thomas and Dr. Wheeler. He looked fully present now, completely solid and real. They've moved on, he said quietly, to where they should have gone a century ago, if the experiment hadn't trapped them between times. Dr. Wheeler's instruments had finally calmed, showing normal readings. The temperature in the square returned to normal, and the unnatural mist dissipated completely. It's over, she said, looking at her monitors. The temporal anomaly has resolved itself. William nodded, looking down at the watch in his hand. It now ticked normally, the hands moving in perfect synchronization with the courthouse clock. I'm here, he said, sounding slightly surprised. Really here, in this time. Thomas approached his great-grandfather cautiously. How do you feel? William looked around at the square, at the modern buildings and vehicles beyond, at the people watching in amazement. Strange, out of place. But he smiled slightly. Present, completely present, for the first time in over 100 years. Dr. Wheeler stepped forward. Lieutenant Blackwood, from a scientific perspective, what you've experienced is unprecedented. Your presence here defies everything we understand about physics and time. William's smile widened. Doctor, Reed used to say the same thing about his theories. He believed time wasn't a straight line but a fabric that could be folded, allowing distant points to touch. And the pocket watch? Thomas asked. How did it help you return? Reed modified it before the experiment. He suspected something might go wrong and wanted a failsafe. William looked down at the watch thoughtfully. He called it a temporal anchor, something that existed both in my original time and could exist in future times as well. As long as the watch survived, it could potentially draw me back to normal time flow. Thomas thought about the note they had found inside the watch. You've been trying to return for a long time. Time moves differently in the in-between. Sometimes I'd experienced decades in what felt like minutes. Other times, a single moment would stretch for what seemed like years. William's expression grew distant. I've glimpsed so many different periods, always briefly, always as an observer, unable to interact fully with the world around me. Until now, Thomas said. William nodded. Until now. He looked around the square again, his expression a mixture of wonder and sadness. Everything I knew is gone. Elizabeth, my parents, my world. Not everything, Thomas said quietly. Your family is still here. My mother, your great-granddaughter, is still alive. And there are others, cousins, nieces, nephews, all descended from your siblings. William's eyes brightened. Elizabeth's sister Mary had children, 4 of them, and they all had families of their own. I'd like to meet them, William said simply, to know that life continued, even after I was lost. As the crowd in the square began to disperse, many still staring in wonder at the young soldier in the antique uniform, Dr. Wheeler approached with a practical concern. Lieutenant Blackwood, your situation presents some administrative challenges. Legally speaking, you don't exist in this time. No birth certificate, no social security number, no identity documents of any kind. William considered this. I suppose that's true. I'm a man out of time in more ways than one. We'll figure it out, Thomas assured him. For now, you're my great-grandfather, who's been abroad for many years. The legal details can wait. As they walked together toward Thomas's car, William stopped suddenly, looking back at the courthouse and the memorial plaque with his name on it. What happens now? He asked quietly. What place is there in this world for a soldier from a century ago? Thomas placed a hand on his great-grandfather's shoulder. We'll find out together, one day at a time. William smiled slightly at that. One day at a time. After 100 years of being unstuck from time entirely, that sounds perfect. He looked down at the pocket watch, still ticking steadily in his hand. For the first time since 1916, I'm experiencing time as it's meant to be experienced, moving forward, one moment after another. As they drove away from the square, William watched the modern world pass by with quiet amazement. The cars, the electronic billboards, the people absorbed in their smartphones. Thomas realized that for his great-grandfather, this world must seem as fantastical as time travel had seemed to Thomas just months ago. Elizabeth never remarried, Thomas said suddenly, remembering the family history. She waited for you her whole life. William was silent for a long moment. How long did she live? He finally asked. Until 1967. She was 92. And she never knew what really happened to me. She knew you didn't abandon her, Thomas said. She always believed you would come back if you could. William looked out the window at the passing landscape. And now I have, 59 years too late. Not too late for the rest of your family, Thomas said gently. Not too late to live the life that was taken from you. William turned back to him. I saw so many wonders in my time between times. Glimpses of the future, your present, that seemed like dreams or hallucinations. Flying machines that crossed oceans. Devices that could show images from across the world. Medicines that cured diseases we thought were death sentences. He shook his head in wonder. But the most miraculous thing of all might be this second chance. To live again. To be part of the world, instead of just passing through it like a ghost. As they drove toward Thomas's mother's house, where the rest of the family was gathering to meet the great-grandfather who had returned from the past, William looked down at the pocket watch one last time before slipping it into his pocket. Time waits for no man, he murmured, recalling the inscription. But sometimes it returns. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the road ahead, and for the first time in over a century, William Blackwood moved forward with the natural flow of time, no longer lost between moments but fully present in a world he would now have the chance to know.